The last item up tonight, new business, is the comprehensive plan update transportation element briefing, and Jay Larson and Nathan Howard are here with us tonight. Go ahead.
Hello, yeah, let me quickly share my screen. So I'm Nathan Howard. I'm a senior transportation planner with Public Works, and I'm joined by Jay Larson, who is the supervisor for the transportation planning group. He'll be presenting a little later in this presentation, but I'm going to be kicking us off. So this will be the last of the elements that you see, the draft elements that you see in the comprehensive plan. So you're finally through all the briefings. So this is that continuation. You've probably seen a similar slide to this in all the other briefings. So we're really here to provide an overview of what's in the transportation element, what's required, some of how the draft is organized, and then major changes that you'll be seeing in the T as you review it. We'll be summarizing public comment, and of course, providing an opportunity to hear feedback from the commissioners. But like with all the other presentations, we provided a staff report, which included a policy matrix of all the changes to the policies, and as well as a draft of the transportation element. So first, I think the important thing is to talk about the requirements of the transportation element. This isn't the complete list of the transportation element requirements in the Growth Management Act. It's one of the longer sections in the GMA, talking about all the requirements. I think the only other long section like this is the land use element. So there's a lot of boxes to check. But here are a few things: transportation inventory, which includes air, water, and ground facilities and services. We also need to do the traffic forecast, which is not currently in the draft because it won't come out until after the EIS is released, which should be in a couple of weeks, and we'll present more on that at the DEIS briefing in a couple of weeks, or I guess about a month. Then there's the requirements for setting LOS standards to gauge system performance. We also have to include the state LOS and the transit LOS standards, though we don't set those standards. Then we need to use our traffic forecast analysis to identify the needs for transportation system, mainly for the county, but we also identify when there's deficiencies in the state system. But it is important to note that we don't have the authority to make decisions on account of the state system. So we can identify issues, we can identify when there's LOS problems, but it's up to ultimately the state to make the decisions on what they can and will do. Then we have a large section on the financial plan, so how we are planning to pay for those projects. There's other requirements scattered throughout the plan, such as strategies for reducing travel demand. And one of the big components is the bike ped component. And it specifically says in GMA that we need to encourage connectivity and promote a healthy lifestyle. So I want to step back and give a little bit of a background. In the past, or I guess in the current adopted plan, it's really separated into 4 pieces: the general policy plan, which includes all of the policies related to those pieces, which includes transportation. Then there's also the transportation element, which doesn't have policies, capital facility plan, which also doesn't have policies, in the parks and rec element. So that's how it exists currently. This is kind of an anomaly in Snohomish County. Almost every jurisdiction has each of the elements separate with their goals and policies within it. And that's kind of the proposal for this comprehensive plan update. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is you'll notice that more so than probably any other element, the transportation element is going through a much larger revision. And a big part of that is trying to merge our policies with our transportation element and just doing the work to make the transportation element much more usable, clear, readable. So that's the big piece here. And as part of that, we relooked at how our goals are organized. And I'm not going to go through everything, but the existing goals were on the left. And we consolidated a few, merged the consistency goal 1 and in the coordination goal 8 into a coordination and consistency. And we did a similar thing with freight and economic development. Then we created a new roads goal, and we added equity to the health and safety piece of it. And the rest of the goals have all been tweaked in some level. And a big reason I'm bringing this up is this is also how we reorganized the comprehensive or the transportation element. So each section of the transportation element falls under each goal. So the first section is coordination and consistency, and then so forth. So the first section, I know I said the first section was goal 1, but there is an introduction section. So the first section is an introduction, and it does include those overview of requirements for the GMA for the transportation element. It also includes travel statistics, both existing and projected. You won't see that in the current draft because we don't have the projected ones because we're waiting for the EIS to be finalized so that we can make those statistics based on which alternative that is chosen by the county. It also includes a brief explanation of major trends. I'll talk about climate change and electric vehicles in a little bit. Ride shares are things like Uber and Lyft. Microtransit are a similar sort of thing that are run by transit agencies. So King County Metro has a few of these programs where they're like Uber in a very narrow space, and you can use an app or you can call them to get picked up, and they charge just as much as a bus. And usually they provide free trips between transit system. And so they're really good around like park and rides and the light rail. And community transit has a pilot program around the Alderwood Mall. And so these sort of changes may impact how transportation is how we see transportation develop and the needs in the future. Autonomous vehicles, as we all know, there's talk about that. But as it exists currently, we don't know when those will be realized. And most vehicles these days do include some form of automation, most new vehicles, such as lane assist or automatic braking, but those are considered level 0, and full automation isn't until level 5. And it's unlikely that'll happen in the near future. And it could have major impacts on the transit service, especially when it comes to demand for transit and parking and other pieces like that. But like a lot of these other things, we just don't know enough now. So we're going to keep an eye on things. Electric bicycles have been on the significant rise. The number of bicycles sold has been skyrocketing, and it could have a serious impact on the transit or transportation system because it can become a real transit commuter tool, especially for those who are uncomfortable biking long distances or biking up and down hills. So it could become a useful tool. And then telework, we all know that it was spiking during COVID. It has declined since then, though there are some sectors that are still seeing a fair amount of telework. But all those statistics are still in flux every single day. So these are just some of the things that we're keeping an eye on. We know they will have likely major impacts on the transportation system. We just don't know how they will actually impact us. So we're monitoring those things. So for the first section, the one on coordination consistency, just real clear, at the top is the goal. And on all these slides, I will include the goal. I'm not going to read the goals because some of them are pretty long, but they're there if you want to reference. This one is a pretty straightforward section. It really is just giving an overview of the requirements on coordination, which is a requirement for us, a requirement for consistency, state, regional, local, consistency with the county planning policies, and consistency with the other elements of the comprehensive plan. And it's really important to note that there's a specific connection between the land use element and the transportation element, because we have to ensure that our transportation facilities are serving the needs of the projected land use. And so we base our transportation decisions based on the adopted land use and the needs that arises. And then, of course, transportation can have a big impact on the land use element, especially when it comes to concurrency and the need to reevaluate land use decisions if we can't fund improvements to fix our level of service issues. Then we have the section on equity, health, and safety. There's a new section on equity. We talk a bit about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that really requires us not to discriminate on when we're doing transportation planning and programming. It also has requirements for providing more of a robust outreach efforts and engagement efforts to people with limited English proficiency. But we also have other pieces in there about other policies related to accommodating elderly and disabled people, and as well as historically and currently marginalized. The safety piece, we have a stronger emphasis on safety in this. The county is currently working on a road safety plan. A draft of that is roughly done, but the finalized draft is still being worked on, and it might be a couple more years before that's finalized and published. But I'm sure when it is done, it will be presented to the commissioners. But one piece that we did pull out of this analysis was this high injury network, which you can see on the right. And those are the locations where there's a disproportionately higher rate of fatalities and serious injury crashes. So that's something that when we're identifying projects that we're making note of, whether these projects are on those high injury networks locations. Oh, and then I meant to say in the last one and this one, it's just important to note we put the goals and the policies all in each section instead of at the end of the document like a lot of other elements do. The environment and climate change. So we improved our whole section on climate change. It included additional strategies on reducing vehicle miles traveled, alternative fuels, and also talking about our vulnerable infrastructure. So if there's issues with flooding or heat or other things to the infrastructure itself, that's something that we are trying to take note of. We also include this graph on the right, which is there was an inventory done on our greenhouse gas emissions a couple of years ago, and this was the projected greenhouse gas emissions based on current policies. So you'll notice the blue here is the on-road vehicles, so that's really the public works portion of this, and it shrinks over time, starting at 38% all the way down to 9%. A big part of that is policies with the state, such as the 2035 ban on internal combustion engines. So a lot of vehicles will become electric at that point and will reduce significantly the greenhouse gas emission, as well as a lot of other pieces that are strategies that are going to be taken into account. We also improved the section on our water and air quality. And I heard in the CIP conversation the piece about the tire dust, and that's one of the pieces that we're aware of and thinking about when it comes to water quality. So a lot of our transportation systems, our facilities can have water quality runoff that needs to get mitigated or accounted for, and the impacts to things like tire dust on the fish is something that we take into account. We also talk a little bit more on fish passage, something that we've been working with Department of DCNR on identifying those culverts that need to get replaced for fish passage. And their SWIM has been working on building standalone projects to remove those barriers to fish passage. And then Public Works itself, as we're improving our roadway, we are also going through and replacing those culverts. So that's something that's a big piece to it. We did also remove a lot of extraneous information that's already in the EIS and not necessary to include in the T itself. So the road section, the big thing that it has in there is the arterial circulation map. So it's one of the major maps that we adopt, which identifies the functional classifications of each of the roadways, such as principal arterial, minor arterial. Those classifications are based on the function of the road, like how the road is intended to be used or how it is being used, which can influence how we design it and the operation of that roadway. This section also includes a lot on the state system. Again, we're required to have the state LOS. We're required to have the state forecast, although that's in the attachment. And we have a list of the state projects. Again, we don't identify those projects, but those are the projects that the state has identified. The state LOS is developed, the highways of statewide significance. The state sets those LOS standards, and the highways of regional significance, PSRC, sets the standards for those. So the larger highways, I-5, 405, 525, US 2, those are set by the state, and then the other state highways are set by the region. All right. I just want to quickly say, it's important to note in this section, we also do identify which state highways, what sections of the state highways we project will be failing LOS by 2044, even after these projects the state are doing are done. And there are 30 segments of the state highway system that we project to be failing in 2044. So the next big change was the active transportation section. So it was previously we talked about active transportation in terms of non-motorized transportation. The industry standard is to call it active transportation. That's what the state does. That's what a lot of other jurisdictions do. There's a list of what that includes. The big reason for that is non-motorized generally isn't as inclusive to like mobility scooters and electric wheelchair devices. It also may be confusing when it comes to electric bicycles and other things like that. The big thing in this section is the bicycle map. I know you probably can't see this map, but hopefully it's clear in the actual plan. This includes both the existing and proposed bicycle facilities for the county. In 2019, there was a large study that we did on active transportation with multiple jurisdictions throughout the county, with bicycle advocacy groups, with community members, with people from the ADA community and such, to identify, to help identify where we want to improve bicycle and pedestrian. So a lot of the recommendations from that was incorporated into this. And one of them was to create this countywide connector routes system, which are those that are kind of the skeletal network of the system, that the idea being that you should be able to get to major areas, major urban areas, major destinations such as high capacity transit areas, schools, things like that, on a skeletal network. Then there's, on this map, it's also included our city facilities, which we do not plan for, and then urban neighborhood cities, which are, or the urban neighborhood routes, which are similar to the city facilities, only in the county's area. So they're not part of the skeletal network, but they're still important pieces of that bicycle network. And then I will talk in a second about the bicycle users and bicycle level of traffic stress. So bicycle users, I can't remember if I brought this up at the when we were talking about the urban core sub-area plan, but there are lots of studies that analyze the bicycle users, and it really breaks it into these groups: the strong and fearless, those who will ride pretty much anywhere; enthused and confident, who are comfortable in most places but prefer to like ride on like a bike lane; and then the interested in concern. I realize those colors are mixed up. The orange and the green are mixed up on this slide. The interest and the concern should be the green. Those are the ones that are the vast majority of people where they are interested, they'd like to be able to bicycle, but they wouldn't do it unless they feel comfortable and safe. And so those are the users that we are trying to capture, because most of our facilities are built really for those orange and red, the strong and fearless, enthused and confident. I believe I did show this, the bicycle level of traffic stress. It's a new methodology that we're adopting into our, hoping to adopt into our transportation element. And it's a common methodology standard that is used in a lot of grant applications. It's used by other jurisdictions such as Bellevue. And it's a tool that we can use to analyze the comfort level or the stress level of our system. And that can help lead us to project decisions, or making adjustments to a project. Maybe if you lower the speed, you could put a bike lane here, or maybe if you go on an adjacent thing, you don't need as robust of a facility. So it's a way for us to analyze and think through the projects. The colors are supposed to match with that previous slide, where the red and the orange are those top two tiers of the most confident. And then the lighter green and the darker green is that last tier, that interested and concerned. The only difference is 2 are for adults and 1 are for children. So theoretically, if a facility has a 1, then most children and families would be comfortable riding on that facility. All right. The transit section mostly is about talking about what is existing and planned for the transit facilities and how the county can support it. There is a strong emphasis on the high capacity transit. So think of the light rail that's coming in, the Sounder, but also the bus rapid transit, the BRT. So we currently have the blue line from Swift, and the green line opened up recently in 2019. You'll also see this darker orange line. That's the orange line from Swift that will be opening up hopefully next year. It's shown as existing because this plan will be adopted next year, hopefully. And then there's also another Swift, 2 more Swift lines. The Gould line, which would go from Everett all the way up to Marysville in Arlington. And that's supposed to open somewhere around 2027, 2029. And then the silver line, which goes from kind of the Boeing area out to Cathcart, and that's going to open up 2031-ish. Aside from community transit, Swift, Sound Transit is going to be opening up their own BRT, the Stride, and that's the one that you see in kind of a lighter orange near 405. And it's going to go from Linwood City Center to Canyon Park in Bothell, and that should be opening up in 2028. Then our section 7 is on freight and economic development. The big thing I wanted to highlight here is we are putting a big emphasis on those freight routes of importance to the state and region. So the state has identified these certain routes that have higher tonnage of freight traffic, and so those are the ones that they emphasize that we should be focusing on supporting the most. But it's important to note that we do include in our inventory all the freight routes in that. It's just not in the T itself. It's in our separate inventory. And this section will be presented by Jay Larson.
So good evening, commissioners. I'm Jay Larson. I'm a supervisor in the Transportation Planning Group of Public Works. I'm going to brief on the next couple sections. Section 8 has a number of critically important set pieces required by GMA to have in the transportation element. This includes particularly the level of service standard, which serendipitously we have talked a lot about tonight, and also the concurrency management system. Next, Nathan. So this is a trope that we we card out quite a bit, but it's because it's really important to think about. Probably the key proponent or the key component of a transportation element is this concept of growth. And it's a growth between the locally established level of service standard. It's between that and the growth that's happening in in population and employment. And then finally, that third leg that's important for the balance here is the willingness to pay for the system improvements. And so just keep this stool, this image in mind as we go through the next few slides, because what I'm going to be talking to you about is what is that perfect level of growth or balance that between the growth that we're required to plan for through the land use plan, the level of service standard that we've been talking about so much tonight, and then those improvements that we have to figure out how to pay for. So one of the tools that we have, and this is one of our most important tools in achieving this balance, is concurrency. Concurrency is required by GMA. It states that the transportation system must be adequate to accommodate growth. And if the system is not adequate, if we're not meeting our LOS standard, then that new growth cannot be permitted. Again, the big piece here is level of service. It's the measurement of adequacy of the system. And it's important to realize that level of service is locally established. Unlike a lot of the other things that we have to plan for that you see in the transportation element and these other elements, this standard is not set by the state. It's not set at the regional level. It's something that we can decide here at the local level. And that's why it's such an important piece of the transportation element. They're broadly outlined in the TE. So what you saw when you were looking at the draft TE that we sent out is you saw this broad outline of the level of service standards. The detail on level of service standards is in county code, and how we measure it, how we implement it is done through administrative rules. But after the TE is going to be adopted, we're going to need to update those the county code and administrative rules, and these are going to be part of the implementation measures that happen at that time. So what does the TE say about level of service standards? It discusses really three types of level of service standards. It discusses a LOS for arterial roadway segments, and our LOS, as Matt mentioned earlier, for arterials, it's a vehicle-based system. It looks at both daily traffic and peak hour travel speed. And this arterial LOS is particularly important in the areas of the county, and that's quite a few areas, where there's very little choice in travel except for by automobiles on roadways. The TE also discusses arterials at ultimate capacity. These ultimate capacity roadways are those where the county council has, designated that because of extreme disruption, either to the environment or the community, further capacity improvements are not going to be, able to happen. And with those, again, it's the same. It's the same standard as with roads for daily traffic and for travel speed, except that the daily traffic level threshold is much higher. And then this is new to this transportation element. We're also looking much more at multimodal corridors. How can we bring into our LOS standard this idea that there are more modes than just vehicle travel? And in this TE, we've created a standard that also considers roadways in, have we brought those roadways up to standards? It considers transit, is there transit in the area at frequencies of 30 minutes or better? considers pedestrian facilities. Are there continuous pedestrian facilities in the corridor, and have they been built to standards? And then it considers bicycle facilities. Are there continuous bicycle facilities in the corridor that meet this bicycle level of traffic stress 3 or better? And Nathan just talked about bicycle level of traffic stress. Level 3 is that level that caters to confident riders. So then also on level of service standard, we made a lot of text changes, but that text changes really have more to do with the fact that we are moving what used to be in text into policies where it actually belongs. And as I said, except for multimodal corridors, this TE makes very little change in our level of service. Okay, next slide, Nathan. So the next section then, and this is also a critical section in any transportation element, and it's often what people are looking forward to seeing the most, is this system improvements and financing. It's where we talk about what improvements need to happen to the transportation system so that we are servicing the land use plan in a way that we are not degrading our level of service. Next slide, Nathan. So in this section, you're going to see the project table, and hopefully that you all got a chance to look at this. But I know that we sent you a 130-page element. It's by far bigger than any of the other elements that you've had to review. But this project table is a really important part of it. And in the project table, we list the project, we list a brief description of the project, and then we show you in these columns about what the benefits of this project are. Really, that is the piece that says, why is this project in the transportation element? And I want to walk through this because it's really important too that not, some projects only click a few of these boxes. Some of these projects click all the boxes. Some of these projects that are in here, they're really hitting all around on a balanced transportation system. For instance, there are two columns on concurrency level of service. One of those is telling you that this road or this improvement project is benefiting roadway congestion. The other one is telling you whether this corridor, this improvement is going to implement multimodal corridors. There's a column that indicates whether the project would support transit speed and reliability. There's a column that indicates whether a project would extend the bicycle facility and network and improve bicycle level of stress. In many of these road projects, we are also building bicycle facilities. We're also building pedestrian facilities. And so it's important that these road projects are also telling you or telling the public as they read this element that we are building a total network as we put these projects in place. There's a column that indicates whether a project would improve safety on the high injury network. Nathan just talked to you a little bit about the high injury network. This is a really important component in this plan. And then finally, there are columns both on freight and on centers connectivity. Next, Nathan. Yeah. So I'm going to divide the projects a little bit. By the way, I can't go through all the projects with you. That would be great, but we clearly don't have enough time. But I'm going to talk a little bit about South County projects and North County projects. Because of the significant size and the population contained in the Southwest UGA, a majority of the transportation projects are in the South County. And this is also, you heard the briefing on the land use plan. This is also the area of the county where we're going to see the highest amount of growth in unincorporated county. The proposed projects here include intersection and corridor improvements that are necessary to maintain safety and LOS in the face of this really significant growth that we're facing. And then also there's a significant number of improvements to provide access to light rail. As Nathan talked to you a little bit about in the transit section, this light rail system that is coming to unincorporated county, biggest transportation investment in decades that we've seen here. How do we, through our planning, through county road projects, county and other projects, take advantage of that to have a total integrated system? And also here, included here is, how do we bring bicycle and pedestrian connectivity to these transit systems? And how do we bring buses and other transit connectivity into these light rail areas? I know it was talked about as part of the urban core subarea plan, but not everyone's going to be able to drive. There's not enough parking spaces at these light rail stations to just be able to drive there and park and hop on a train. And so we've got to really think about how are we most effectively getting buses to these light rail stations, and how are we connecting between the light rail stations and this higher density development that's going on around them. Next, Nathan, there we go. And then North County projects. North County, also critically important, is much more about the road system than South County is. And this is the area where we have intersection safety projects. Some of these are high on the high injury network system. We're talking about increased capacity. There's state highways are on both these maps, but in the North County, we're looking at increased capacity on this congested US 2 trestle and SR 9 in Lake Stevens and SR 531 in Arlington. There are also proposed improvements connecting into the Cascade Industrial Center in Arlington and Marysville, and connecting to what is going to be a new I-5 interchange in Marysville at 156th. Okay, next, Nathan. There we go. So here's the price tag slide. All told, this 20-year project list has a price tag of $953 million. That's a 20-year price tag. This slide shows kind of how we've divided it into 4 major categories. And then it also had, these are the year of expenditure costs. The first 2 categories, which are intersections and arterial corridors, these are the traditional type of projects that you have seen in every one of the transportation elements since the beginning of GMA. And these 2 categories total to over $500 million. But these second 2 categories are fairly new to this transportation element. These are those transit supported projects that are talking about how do we have mobility in these higher density areas that we're planning for, and then the active transportation section, which we've really beefed up in this transportation element. These categories total to over $400 million. So in total, this proposed project list addresses roadway congestion, roadway and pedestrian safety, transit speed and reliability, and bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. It makes the system more multimodal with a stronger emphasis on climate change and sustainability. Next, Nathan. So the financial strategy. The financial strategy is also something that's required, as Nathan said, by GMA. We have to be able to show that we have an ability to pay for the project list that's in the transportation element. And the first part of doing any financial strategy is to look at current law revenue. This is about where you are getting your funding from now under current law and projecting it out for 20 years. And by projecting this current law revenue out, we've shown that, in the 20-year period of time of this plan, we'll be looking at about $3.27 billion, or almost $3.3 billion for 20 years. Next, then, how does that compare to the costs that we have over that same 20-year period of time and this new project list? So this is a snippet out of the spreadsheet that we used to look at this. A majority of that $3.3 billion is going to be spent on the current system. We've got a significant current transportation system in unincorporated county. It has to be maintained and it has to be operated. And then that's what comes off the top first. Next, what comes off the top is, the capital projects that we have to build that are part of maintaining that, the current system we have on the ground. That includes things like bridge replacement and pavement overlays. Things that we have to do, they wear out, we have to replace them, but it's not about expanding the system to meet growth. So then finally, we have to bring in that $950 million in growth related projects. So when it's all done, we've looked at the traditional revenue sources and we've looked at the 20-year transportation spending needs. That leaves a plan of $650 million shortfall. It's a daunting thing that we looked at as we were looking at this. And so that was where we had to put, sharpen our pencils and start really looking at what is going to be possible. And so this is where we started looking at what other places, what additional revenue is out there. So next, Nathan, thank you. How do we bridge this gap? These are the supplemental revenue measures that are a combination of state actions that are currently being developed. And, right off the top, this road usage charge is being strongly considered by PSRC to fund the regional transportation plan. It's being looked at the State Highway Commission as a way to replace the gas tax, because we already know that the coming of electric vehicles, more fuel efficient vehicles, we are seeing less gas tax revenue coming in. And so that's one thing we considered, along with other state actions that are out there. We also looked at funding partnerships with other transportation agencies. One of the projects on this list is an I-5 overcrossing at Ashway of I-5 for transit, bikes and peds. The county has already been pledged by the state $20 million toward that. We believe that there are more of these types of partnerships that are out there. And then there are these actions that are within the county's purview and that the county council can enact. There's a number of them on this list. And then finally, there are two items on this list that are funding measures that would require us going to a public vote. And one of those is, funding a portion of the TBD, or Transportation Benefit District, through a sales and use tax, right? I had to remember for a minute. But in total, these come to over $1 billion. We don't have to do all of them, but we think that this list is realistic, and we think that it fits within GMA as a way to look at the funding for this plan. And this is enough needed to balance the funding for the plan. So with that, I've finished my section of it, and I'll turn it back over to Nathan.
Thank you, Jay. And I just have one slide left just on the public input piece. So even though the bulk of the work that we've been doing with drafting the transportation element and pieces, we've actually been working on this process for a while. And there was a project that was analyzing transportation access to the light rail stations, started in like 2018. Partnership with PDS, talking about land use, and significant number of outreach events, online open houses, stakeholder meetings, and we received a lot of input from that, which has helped shape this transportation element, especially when the planning that went into the urban core sub-area plan, which is connected to this. this 2019 active transportation study, I mentioned it before, that really was brought about by the PSRC at the 2015 comprehensive plan update, noting that Snohomish County needs to do more work to make a more robust effort on bicycle and pedestrian planning in the county. So we did a lot of studies around that, a lot of outreach to community groups and stakeholders in cities and all sorts. Then in 2021, there was the EIS scoping open houses, which again had a significant amount of outreach efforts. That had a lot to do with really what projects people wanted or didn't want to see in the transportation element. And we'll talk more about that at the EIS briefings coming up. And then finally, we had the policy comment period that ran for a month. We got about 81 comments. About a third of those were non-policy related, even though it was a policy comment period, usually road specific, roads that they had issues with, roads that they wanted to see us address issues with. But most of the comments that we received were kind of policy text specific comments that were all very different. We've incorporated those changes when appropriate. The only real theme that, aside from those those little policy changes, was this a lot of comments related to rural transportation and the concerns around rural transportation. But the comments were from both sides. One set of comments were about the concerns about us not investing enough in the rural transportation system and wanting us to invest more in that system. And then another side wanting us to not invest in the rural system, mainly around the concerns about what that means for rural growth and encouraging of rural growth. So those were the major comments that we received. And on that, just open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Jay and Nathan. Any observations or questions from commissioners? I guess you could say it's worrisome that we see a shortfall coming up, but it sounds like you guys are doing everything you can to understand that and wrap your heads around it. So I think we have confidence in you. Commissioner Sheldon.
Just a couple of questions. I know it's getting late. My wife has given me the look a few times, wondering when we're going to eat. The high injury network, who invented roundabouts anyway?
I'm not sure who invented roundabouts. I can tell you though that we have found that roundabouts are both useful for safety and are also useful for congestion. And this is the reason why we are increasingly using roundabouts as a way to address congestion issues and safety issues at intersections.
It's important to note that the studies do show that they may not reduce the number of accidents, but they reduce the severity. It's very, very rare for a fatality or a serious injury at roundabouts compared to a traditional signalized intersection.
Because I find out on Highway 9, you get up to around Lake Stevens, going towards Arlington and there, and you get in the roundabouts, the people think that when they're on Highway 9, they got the jurisdiction to just keep stepping on the pedals and keep going. I don't know if there's one day we can do something on a website saying how the roundabout is supposed to be used, because it seems like if they're coming from north to south, they got the jurisdiction to do whatever they want. So that was just my concern. And the other one was on Sundays, I noticed I-5 is just, if you don't get on the freeway on I-5 before 1 o'clock, you're not going anywhere. So what are we going to be able to do down to save the congestion widen I-9? Who would be the responsible to do widen Highway 9 so more traffic could go that way instead of everyone trying to go southbound and is stuck trying to get to Linwood in 3 hours?
So there are a significant number of improvement projects in the next 20 years on SR9. Some of them are actually happening soon. And we should see it. I don't expect, though, that those improvement projects, and I think we have shown that with our modeling, are going to cure congestion. I'm not sure that we are going to be able to cure congestion on that on Highway 9. But there are improvement projects that are there.
And my last question, and I know it's getting late. Has all the county vehicles turned to electric cars?
Not yet.
We're getting there though.
Yeah, we're moving in that direction. But I'm not sure when. It takes a while to turn over the fleet, and we haven't done that. I know we are retiring a couple of non-electric cars, many of them this year, but I'm not sure what the timeline is for doing that.
Hey, thank you for everything.
Thank you, Ray. Any other questions for Jay or Nathan? Nathan, while we have him here. It's a huge, huge project. Kimberly, go ahead.
I guess my question was, have you guys shared the bike planning map with all the local jurisdictions and tried to coordinate that?
Yes, we've shared the map with every jurisdiction within Snohomish County. We've received input from the majority of them. A significant portion of staff from each city helped draft the draft map, but not every city. And that partly has to do with staffing levels, I would assume. Snohomish County has a fair amount of staff, and the larger cities tend to have a fair amount of staff, but some of the smaller cities and towns have consultants that only come on board at certain times for planning and things. So, but yes, we have.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Any other questions for transportation planners while they're here? Well, thank you guys very much. This tonight, I think, wraps up our briefings for the update of the comprehensive plan. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of this and coming to all of our meetings. It's kind of been a journey. If anybody has any observations or thoughts on what we've been through and what we've observed, I'd love to hear it. I'd like to compliment staff. I think they've done a fantastic job, consistency and integrity throughout the process. And it's really been a joy to listen to them and think about what they present to us. And now we go to the open house and the hearings. So good job, Planning Commission and staff.